Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Yadacito. I represent Baker West, and we are the sales agency for this beautiful project, the CURV. Thank you so much for coming tonight and spending your evening with us for Passive House Canada's Pulse Vancouver social series.
And I am Chris Hill. I am a partner at B Collective Homes, and I am a former Passive House board member. I did spend 6 years within the Passive House environment and was honored to be a part of putting this event together, and so we're looking forward to it.
Okay, before we start, we want to start with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are situated on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations.
I audibled here. I put my notes away. And so I asked City of Vancouver this afternoon a couple of stats. Anybody here know the BP issued square footage, other than the people I talked to earlier who gave me this number, of passive house buildings in City of Vancouver? So I'm looking for a big number. It's a square foot number. Anybody want to throw out a guess? 200,000 low. Keep going up. It is 1 million. So there's been about 1 million square feet of passive house gone through the BP process. Not all of them are built like the CURV, but that has gone through the BP process. So I think it's a pretty big number for a community within what we're doing here. So.
And so without further ado, we want to actually pass it over to Chris Ballard, the CEO of Passive House Canada.
Well, thank you, Sarah and Chris, and welcome everybody for coming out tonight. It's really nice to see this crowd. There are a few seats up here if you want to sit. There's lots of good food, so feel free to enjoy that. And after the presentation, there'll be some time for you to continue your networking. So we call these Pulse events. They are the Passive House social events. We hold them in locations across Canada. Really thrilled to be in this facility tonight because this is a groundbreaking development that we're so pleased to show the world. And at the first opportunity, we said, let's get everybody involved together and really kick this off. So we wouldn't, before I get too far down into my notes here, I want to acknowledge a couple of people who are here tonight. We have Councillor Adrian Karn. Thank you very much for being here tonight. And I would be remiss if I didn't introduce one of my board members from Vancouver, Rebecca Sorbara, who's here. So thank you, Rebecca. So I'll be scrolling through my extensive notes here to try and keep us on track tonight. And I've instructed Sarah that if I go off topic, she has my permission to rein me back in and keep things on track. You know, this event would not be possible without the generous support of a number of organizations. First, the Brivia Group, but Rick Gregory will talk more about that later on. Our other sponsor, Baker West. So what I'll do is I'm going to acknowledge these folks and then I will give them a couple of minutes to stand up and just say a few words. Our next sponsor was the Baker West Real Estate Incorporated Group. Jackie Chen is the CEO. He'll speak for, where's Jackie? Oh, there he is right in the front seat. Do you want to stand up and give us 2 or 3 minutes now, Jackie? Or?
Okay, sure.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm Jackie Chan, CEO of Baker West Real Estate. We are the exclusive sales and market agency for Brivia Group, representing CURV, which is the tallest passive house building in the world. And we are definitely a very strong advocate for sustainable building. We are part of a big conglomerate nationally under the Peerage Capital Group. We do over $50 billion worth of sales in real estate every year. So I would be happy to talk to any one of you after the event about your future projects, especially if it has anything to do with Passive House.
Very good. Thank you very much. So also in the audience, we have Ben Wong from Small Planet Supply. There's Ben.
Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. I'm Ben Wong, representative of Small Planet Supply. Today we are so excited to learn more about the tallest passive house building in the world. And it's our honor to be one of the sponsors. Small Planet Supply is intended to provide to designer, builders, and homeowners with high efficiency building material and mechanical system. And also the education to using them as well. And thanks for all peer support in these 7 years. Our standard HRV and Senko 2 CO2 refrigerant heat pump are highly accredited in the market. And CURV remarks the breakthrough of the passive house design. And we hope our new product prefabricate drop-in water heating system water job also have another breakthrough in decarbonization and electrification like CURV. And we hope, we wish you have a wonderful night, and also appreciate all the contribution of the Passive House Canada. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next on our sponsorship list is Puru Khanna, who's Vice President of Sales, representing HVAC Systems and Solutions, and Swigon. Thank you.
Thanks. Good evening, everyone. Peru here with HVAC Systems. We are a equipment supplier based in Vancouver, and we have a shifted focus towards passive house and net zero buildings since about 2015. We did a small multifamily project in 2017 up in Pemberton, and that started a curveball effect. And over the years, we've been involved in Fire Hall 17 in Vancouver, which is the first net zero certified fire hall, on its way to being the first passive house certified fire hall in North America. We've also worked on the Clayton Community Center, which will be the first passive house certified community center in North America. So you can see the pattern here. And then also UVic Student and Housing, which by far is the biggest project we've done. It was over 300,000 square feet of passive house certified buildings. So happy to be here, happy to learn more, share our experiences. I've got my team here as well, and you can drop by kind of towards the back there. We have some brochures and pamphlets we'll go over, and yeah, looking forward to the great discussion this evening, and thank you everyone. Enjoy your night.
Great, thank you very much. Last but certainly not least, we have Mithun Bindi from RBC. He is the manager of builder development.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, first of all, Passive House Canada for putting this event on, and to our host, Baker West Brivia Group, for the hospitality. My name is Mithun Bindi. I'm one of the 2 builder managers in RBC for the BC region. RBC's Climate Action Institute that we have strives to bring together research insights and industry experts to help clients and communities apply climate solutions. The Institute's goal is to bring together economists, policy analysts, as well as business strategists to help research and advance ideas that can contribute to Canada's climate progress. Initially focused on building and real estate, agriculture, and energy systems, the Institute has a 3-part mandate: inform, engage, and act. I won't go into too much details. The website's got a lot of the information, but what I would just say is that if you'd like to stay up to date on the information around RBC's strategy to support clients and communities in the sector across the economy in an orderly and inclusive transition to net zero, and the risks and opportunities it faces, I would encourage you to visit rbc.com/climate. And in closing, I'd just really quickly like to say thank you again to the partners and sponsors for putting together this evening's event. And thank you to everyone in the room seeking to advance the net zero transition through education and action.
Thank you very much. Thanks to our sponsors for allowing us to put tonight's event on. We are recording so that because we had more people want to come tonight than we could possibly fit in this room. So We'll edit the video and we will post the video. Stay tuned, and you'll be able to view it through passivehousecanada.com. I want to say, because speaking to the councillor here and all the proud people who live in the greater Vancouver area, what this project means. You know, for those of us who are Passive House practitioners, we feel some pride that Rick and his extended team have taken this on. But I can tell you that I get to speak to people from around the world. A couple of weeks ago, I was speaking to a German business organization. 2 weeks before that, to a Swedish or Swiss business organization. And I put the slide up of this building, and there were audible gasps throughout the room. People had no idea that this is happening in Canada, and they were really amazed. I think they were amazed because the building is so beautiful to begin with, and I think maybe they were a little amazed that us Canadians could pull this off. And by that, I mean Rick and his team. So congratulations to Vancouver and all the work you're doing to make this happen. We need more of these all across Canada, and I certainly have a lot of fun wherever I travel, pointing to Vancouver and all the good things that are happening here with Passive House, and sort of poking some of the other cities to speed it up and follow Vancouver's lead. So congratulations to all of you here. So one of the things you know that when you've got your notes on your phone is that if you inadvertently touch the wrong part of the phone with your thumb, you lose your notes. So bear with me, talk among yourselves first. Oh, look at this, perfect. Old technology. Sometimes old technology is the best technology. I just want to take a second to introduce our panels. I have extensive notes on these four gentlemen here. If I read everything, we'd be here the rest of the night. So I'm going to read literally the first one or two sentences. You probably know everyone up here anyway. But let me start with Sean Pander, who is the manager of Green and Resilient Buildings with the City of Vancouver. And he's also a member of the BC Energy Step Code Council, the Buildings to Electric B2E Leadership Council, past chair of ZEBEX, the Zero Emissions Building Exchange, of which I'm happy to say Passive House Canada was there too, and a recipient of Canada's Clean 50 Award. And I could go on, but you know, we all know Sean, and he's a big booster for what we're trying to do. Besides Sean is Brian Hubbs, who's a managing principal, RDH Building Science. And Brian has more than 30 years of experience as a consultant practicing exclusively in the field of building science. He's completed hundreds of buildings, building enclosures, investigations, and rehabilitation projects, and provided design consultation and construction reviews of building enclosures for new buildings. Beside Brian is Rick Gregory, the project director for Brivia Group. Rick is a senior executive with more than 30 years of experience in the planning and execution of large, complex construction projects, both private and public sector. His portfolio spans major civil, institutional, resort, hotel, office, retail, and residential projects. And certainly last but not least, on the other side of the page, is Gwen Vos, principal of Arcadis IBI Group. Gwen is a first-hand witness and participant in Vancouver's evolution into a globally significant urban center. With Arcadis since 2005, he has been project manager and lead designer on a number of significant projects in Canada, Hong Kong, and the Middle East. So welcome all of you to tonight's panel. And I think now is the time, Rick, I will turn the floor to you for a minute as both sponsor to discuss the CURV project. Then we'll get to the tough questions.
There's a picture of, I don't know how many people know who this is on the screen right now. Anybody? Jackie. I've got a mic here, I'm good. It's Keeling, and he's the one that discovered or figured out how to measure very accurately carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. He did it in 1954, and it took him 4 years to, there we go, to get this observatory set up on Mauna Loa, where he would raise a balloon with a little vacuum chamber up into the atmosphere. He'd get it about 10,000 feet above the location here, and then open it up and get a sample of the atmosphere. And then bring it down in his lab. He would determine how much carbon dioxide it was in. And in 2004, when I moved to Vancouver, my son was going to university at UBC, and he came home and he said, "Dad, have you heard of the Keeling curve?" And I said, "No, what is it?" He showed me, and I threw it onto Excel, and I saw that it was certainly increasing. But if you looked at it from a bit of an angle, it looked like it had a bit of a curve to it. So I knew that I needed another point to try and get a prediction of where this curve was headed. And so you've got CO2 along the vertical and time along the bottom. At the Industrial Revolution, we knew we were at about 280 parts per million. We had varied between 180 and 280 throughout the last few 100,000 years, depending on whether we were glaciated or not. In 1850, we were at the 280 parts per million. So that was another point on my graph, which allowed me to produce this. At 280 at 1850, I took the best exponential graph I could get that fit the curve, and I put a sine curve on top of it. And I needed to do this because I had a friend that lived in Burlington that I was going to bet a beer that in May of 2014, 10 years from that point in time, we would cross 400 parts per million. And so if I take this part of the graph here and blow it up, and if you look at this particular part of the graph, I started plotting it in 2004. And you can see that it maps. I was surprised how accurately it mapped onto the let me go back to my 2004. I was off by a month. It actually broke in April, but he still bought me the beer, so it was a good bet. But I kept monitoring it, and I do every month. I plot on this, and you can see that a few years after I won my bet, the graph started to pull away from the blue line, and it's for me it was something that maybe my original graph was wrong, or maybe it's something else that is telling us something that is. We've got this blue graph is a pretty scary curve to begin with, and the fact that we're actually pulling away from it. This is our scorecard. This is the scorecard for the planet, and so for me it was I work in the real estate industry, and felt that if I'm going to make a difference, we need to build better, and I had originally When I worked on a project in Dubai, we had looked at other buildings around the world that sort of were symbols in very simple lines, including the Eiffel Tower and Sydney Opera House and the Burj that I was managing, and so we felt we could build a symbol for Vancouver that would be more than just trying to nudge the industry in the right direction. It would be something that we could all living here be proud of. I think there's a video now that, Sarah?
Architecture. It's an interesting subject. I think it's my father. I mean, I went to school and was a pretty rubbish pupil, really. And then my father decided that instead of me joining the army, which is what I wanted to do, he said, no, you don't destroy buildings, sort of, why not put some buildings up? And so I said, okay, I'll become an architect then.
I had the privilege to visit Vancouver approximately 3-4 months ago, and I have been to Vancouver years back. What I really found very interesting is how this city has blossomed. Given that it has such a natural geographical beauty to begin with, developers have now understood that you have a perfect scenario to develop fantastic product. I saw the transformation over a course of maybe 6-7 years, and it's admirable. I was asked by somebody recently whether or not Vancouver is at the same level of this or that, and I really think that Vancouver is setting a tempo that is very unique. I think the level of quality and sophistication that I saw in Vancouver is not unlike New York. In some cases, I would even say that it will surpass in the finishing and quality. So I was actually very proud to have gone and to be able to get acquainted and to understand the fabric of the city, the restaurants and the lifestyle. It became one of those cities that are very unforgettable.
In nature, there are very few straight lines. And then, so where does the straight line come from? It's got to be a human invention. Well, it is. There'll be two people dividing up a field and put two rocks down, and there's this implied straight line that only really humans can understand. And so for me, those big cities, the form of them is synonymous with where we got it wrong. And when the opportunity came up to do this highly efficient building, it seemed nice to sort of mimic some of the forms of nature, which give it its shape, the curved nature of it.
CURV really expressed that ideology of where it is a young sprout from the ground, where it represents nature with its lines and the waters meeting the mountains and the skies of the beautiful British Columbia, where culture and diversity, different status and spectrum comes together in one. A monumental building in both its architectural significance, its interior design, its technology, and its engineering. It will truly create a new era and a new time in real estate investment and ownership, where everything else after this point will become obsolete, will become something that is of the past.
The amount of CO2 that's generated from buildings is significant. It's about a third from industry, a third from transportation, and a third from buildings. Right now, that's all waste. It's energy that's kind of heating you as it goes by and out the envelope. And so what we're doing, building to Passive House standards, is saving that energy. As the fresh air comes in and the stale air goes out, we extract all the heat energy from the outgoing air in the wintertime and transfer that into the incoming air so that we're not having to reheat it when it comes in. We build our envelopes so that they don't leak energy as well. So once the heat is in, it stays in. And so it's really eliminating waste from our building, which we feel is a symbol for the way buildings should be built in the future. There's 5 basic principles we followed on our project for reaching Passive House. We have well-insulated walls or super insulated walls, eliminated thermal bridging to the extent that no other buildings have been able to do, and that includes thermal breaks through the window frames and thermal breaks through the slab where we have balconies. We've used HRV systems for extracting heat energy from the air in terms of our mechanical systems. We also use extremely high quality windows to keep in the heat and bring in the sun when it's required and reflect it when it's not required. And the other item is the air tightness, and we do that by minimizing the number of connections between panels by making the panels very large, the panels that enclose the building.
My name is Kang Lee. I'm a founder and the CEO of Brivia Group. I started the company since the year 2000 under my three children's name, Alexa, Vivian, and Brian. So Brivia is more focused on the residential project. That's what we do in Montreal, Quebec City, Mont Tremblant, and we start to expand to Toronto and Vancouver. For us, as a developer, we always want to do something that one step ahead than the others, and there's a Brivia beside. We give the quality of our project and the design. This environmental is ESG for us is our next future that we Brivia want to expand on that.
CURV expands Brivia mission as a developer. It's very important for us because we have built a very strong brand, the Brivia brand. So we're very, very proud that this pan-Canadian brand that started from Montreal through many, many flagship and landmark projects that we do continue to carry on to the BC and Vancouver market.
I always love that fact that it's kind of like almost like an element that landed from somewhere, but it belongs in the whole environment. It's not just about the sculpture itself, but it's the messaging and the reflection and how these materials, absorb the surroundings. And I think that for this particular project in CURV, if we were able to curate an element that has these values, it will add so much more to the landscape and to the arrival experience to the building.
We paid special attention to the silver grey colour of the aluminium because we wanted a material that reflected the surroundings in a way that took on the hues of the surroundings rather than a pure reflection like a mirrored silver would do. And we like the idea that when the facade is facing towards the ground, you get the parks and the buildings around, sort of the building taking on those colours, and then as it swoops around and faces towards the sky, you get the sky and the clouds reflected in the building. As the seasons change and as the light changes through the day, so the colour of the building will subtly change, sort of chameleon.
But we also played a little bit with history. How do you give sort of like this classiness without being so specific? Like for instance, some of the columns in the lobby, I wanted it to have this sort of like fluted feel to it, which speaks to history. I mean, this is something that used to be done in the Art Deco. There's literally kind of like touches of history within the space. It's not only about the materiality, it's about how do you manipulate the elements to give you this sort of like, you don't know what makes it so interesting, but it is there. And then obviously we have this rhythmical wood paneling on the top of the lobby, which automatically puts you in that sort of like serene Zen spa environment, but it's still fairly elegant and sophisticated. And then you have this beautiful water feature that doesn't feel like water, but it feels more like a fabric. You froze the movement in time. You can see the waves of the water descending, but it doesn't really make any noise. It's kind of like a very soothing, very quiet, but very visual. And in front of that, we actually curating kind of like a water feature, which will have a tree of life. So you arrive, you're coming into this beautiful lobby, and you want to feel that proud of being part of this environment. And most importantly, psychologically, you're kind of like cleansing the minds of the people. So you're coming from a very busy city, from work, and then you're coming into this sort of like zen environment that kind of like brings you down. Now you're in you have a different feeling. And as you ascend and you come into your corridor and then you're coming into your unit, the experience has become that much more important.
CURV is the world's tallest passive house. Normally, as you know, a passive house, it ranges from 4 to 12-story heights, but this one we're talking about 60-story height and never been done in the world before. We basically setting a new standard of making sure that the energy green efficiency is there. And then not just there for a real benefit to the residents, to the city. In due course, we'll be able, with that 90% of energy saving, to quantify actually how much of benefits that will provide to the residents and to the city of Vancouver with such a world-class project.
With Tom Wright and Escobar, with the location of this project, I believe that it's going to make a big plus in Vancouver and internationally.
I've always wanted to do a building in North America. Vancouver is just an incredible place, and I like the idea of the CURV in Vancouver. I think when you look at the other buildings in Vancouver, and there are some really quite interesting ones, it sort of sets itself apart. It's got quite a nice flavour. It's very simple.
With the curation of CURV being the tallest passive house building in the world and the tallest residential high-rise in Vancouver history, it really speaks to that. The luxury of health, the luxury of safety, and the luxury of human relationships and community, allowing all of us as human beings to really stand tall and have that understanding of what is around us and what we've always had and not take it for granted. With the name of CURV, it signifies the point in time where we're taking a new direction. We're being ahead of the curve. The stakeholders and the residences can positively contribute to our environment and to our society by just living in their homes every second, every moment. The CURV is able to do it in a artistically and aesthetically and materialistically pleasing and luxurious way, set our development and this building apart from anything else that we have ever seen before, with the tallest, highest clubhouse amenity space and rooftop amenity space that's never been seen before in the west coast of Canadian real estate development, which is not only functional but also beautiful.
We wanted a symbol. If we were going to build to Passive House standard, we had Brivia wanted to have something that would symbolize a new direction in building, and so we needed to have something that would be recognized, a simple form, but an elegant form. And Tom, who I had worked with on the Burj Al Arab in Dubai, had achieved that for the client there. We think Tom has done it again. And what's not to like? You're at the apex of the downtown peninsula, highest point. You're across from Nelson Park. You're minutes from the beach. You're minutes from downtown, in the best looking building on the planet.
It bookends between the Burj Al Arab and then the CURV at the end, and somehow, whereas Burj Al Arab was energy efficient, because we put a lot of mirrored glass in it, it wasn't designed specifically to be energy efficient, whereas the CURV is a very energy efficient building, and it gives it another level of credibility. I think CURV will be a benchmark building. It's almost a prototype. Well, any building like this, when you're doing something that's totally new, becomes a prototype. But the whole idea of saving the planet and linking that into architecture and passive houses, it's starting to drive architecture in some really interesting ways. And it's sort of given it a meaning beyond just a sort of sculptural effect.
So we have a few questions to kick things off, but what I've said to these gentlemen is that I'm looking for some fluid discussion. So if you want to jump in, interrupt, whatever, that's fine. Really looking for some insight into Passive House at the scale of what we're doing here. So Rick, I want to start off with you, and I think the charting that you've been doing for so many years gives away your concerns and your interests in things environmental. And oh, by the way, if you ask me when I was born, I'll tell you it was at 320 ppm, which unfortunately gives away my age. So the question that I'll kick off with is why Passive House for you?
You know, there's a lot of different standards you can build to, and one of the most common in this part of the world was LEED. When I found out there wasn't a lot of paperwork involved with the Passive House certification, I thought that's the one for me. It's very simple. You have to get your designer to design a building that has an energy budget. And it's 15 kilowatt hours per square meter per year, and that's it. That's all you have to do. So it's simple, it's easy to understand, and it's very goal oriented.
Very good, very good. Sean, why is the city behind Passive House?
You know, for us, we looked at nearly 60% of the global warming emissions in Vancouver come from the burning of natural gas for creating space heat and heating up water in buildings. And, you know, we looked at the complexity of other approaches. We looked at the regulatory regime that we had, and it wasn't, you know, we kept trying to set higher and higher standards, but we weren't getting the results. And when we really came to understand, you know, first and foremost, this is about space heat. And so we said, okay, we looked around the world for a standard or something we could reference that would tackle that primary problem. And then when we started to learn about Passive House, and that it very first and foremost, not entirely, but focuses on, you know, ensuring that you minimize the loss of heat and in the summer, you know, the heating loads that are placed upon the building. And that really inspired us. And as we began to talk to builders and designers around the world, New York, Brussels, et cetera, what it came to us is that it didn't matter who you engaged. The idea of, you know, putting on a sweater before having electric socks, you know, like people got it, like this makes sense. And it appealed to tradespeople because, you know, they don't care about numbers and we got this gold rating or we hit this number or whatever. That's not what they were interested in. And I talked to tradespeople in New York quite a bit, and, you know, they were like, they're craftsmen, and they were really excited. Like, I do this kind of detail like hundreds of times, you know, a month. And I've been doing it wrong my whole career, you know, and once they get involved in a project, it really, and architects the same way, you know. Tom, on the video, I had the privilege of going with Tom to Brussels and viewing some passive houses. And just once you see the simplicity in concept, not necessarily in execution, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. And we saw that people would take their experience in these exemplary buildings and apply it to all their projects.
Right. I think that's a good point. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. We're told by, we do a lot of training, and our students often tell us once they learn it, they can't unlearn it, and they may not be taking the Passive House knowledge to a Passive House project, but they're going to apply those principles. So we've sort of won in many ways. Brian, what's the biggest challenge you find with the work you did around the CURV? What are the technical challenges?
So I've been involved over the years building passive house buildings and net zero buildings, high energy efficiency buildings that were pretty conventional. And there we just buy the best things we can buy and we put them in a way that makes sense with the right glass to wall ratio, and they work. And I've built lots of iconic buildings like the CURV where they're not passive house and they're not net zero. But even then they're difficult to build. There's a lot of complexity, but we go and we buy the best system that you can build complex buildings out of, and we make that work. Air leakage, water leakage, the standard things. This one combines both of those things, and so the biggest challenge here was that to build iconic buildings, you need specific, very, very plastic and easy to use construction materials and systems, and they just weren't on the market. So there were people producing passive house windows for small passive house buildings and high performance curtain wall for iconic buildings, but nobody was producing the kind of system that we needed. So it was going out there from scratch, developing new systems, and then going to market and trying to convince manufacturers to make them for us. And then figure out how we're going to ship them here, because they're much larger sections. You want to minimize the amount of interfaces, so you're building them in bigger blocks, and you get them here from wherever you make them. So those are the big challenges, is that the industry for an iconic building like this, it's not there yet, so we need to get it there. And then once it's there, and once we convince manufacturers that this is the future of buildings, those materials will be available for everybody. But right now, we're breaking new ground on every system.
I'll add to that, just
perfect.
There's many solutions to problems, and if the problem is to hit this energy metric, you could have a building with zero glass and thick insulated walls, which would be one solution. But we have to balance it with marketability and actually creating a building that people want to live in and will enjoy living in. So it's been a challenge to work, and we're working with the consultants, but also with the manufacturers, as I said, to actually make something that'll work for all those different aspects.
Just to give you an idea too, I had to join ASTM Standards Development Committee so that we can develop a standard for the materials that we're going to use on this building before we actually order them and use them, right? So this is how cutting edge what we're doing here is.
But once it's done, it can be echoed across more and more projects.
That's the hope. So Rick, how does it feel to be at the bleeding edge?
Well, hopefully it's the leading and not bleeding edge. We're selling views. Everybody, all our competitors are selling views, and so to go with small little windows was not an option. And so the technology that goes into our facade, including the windows, is really incredible. And as Brian says, there is a lot of risk that Brivia is undertaking to do this project, but we've got a great team working for us, and we're very determined, to get where we need to get to.
So the first time you and I talked about this project, almost a year and a half ago, we spent a lot of time talking about windows and these new types of windows. Fill us in a little bit about these new windows, if you can.
There's a sample of our windows over in the corner there. If you get a chance, just go take a look at it. But one of the things we're doing is electrochromic glass, and it's glass that is run by an algorithm. So the program knows where the sun is, the angle every minute of the day, every day of the year. It knows whether there's cloud cover or not. We have sensors on the roof. It knows the shadows of the adjacent buildings, so if there's a shadow on the window, it can clear it. It doesn't have to be dark. And it knows the temperature, so it will adjust the building according to what it needs to do to get the amount of solar gain in the winter when we're trying to get in energy and prevent overheating in the summer by darkening the windows. And by doing that, it's turned out that we've been able to get rid of all our fan coil units in all our standard units and temper the air, both cooling and heating, using the makeup ventilation air. We did look at using vacuum glass. It was considered a very large risk, but we weren't getting the numbers down to where they needed to be in terms of our energy budget. But we came up with another way of doing it, which was to look at enclosing the balconies, and that was able to get us over the line without having to go to vacuum glass. But I have put vacuum glass in a sauna that I built in my home, where we've got 100-degree difference between the inside and outside temperature, and it hasn't cracked yet. So I think it's the future still.
Maybe your next 60-story building.
Our next building.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sean, a question for you then. So when an innovative group like Brivia comes to you with a design, or comes to the city with a design like this, what are some of the challenges the city faces in examining and approving? Is this different than other buildings that come to the city?
Yeah, there are some commonalities and differences. I mean, every large project in the city faces some sort of special challenges, because the city has a couple priorities. Definitely addressing the climate emergency is one of our highest priorities, and this building definitely is leading the way and helping shape the market for future buildings in doing that. But we also have to look at sort of housing affordability questions, and you have to look at in the neighborhood it's located, there's tenant relocation. So, you think, oh, it's a climate emergency, this should just pull out all the stops. And we've done a lot of work directly with the team to try to, okay, how do we navigate the rules? You got to follow the rules, but the rules have room to maneuver within them. But there are other priorities the city's wrestling with. So, and those other groups their mandate is we've got to get more affordable housing. We've got to make sure that's quality. We've got to make sure the traffic that's, created by a big project like that. So you've got multiple groups with multiple mandates. You're adding density to a neighborhood. The neighbors are like, if it becomes a big traffic snarl, that's a problem we live with for a long time.
Right. So lots of complexity that the city has to consider. So changing things up, sort of a rapid question round for the four of you, because you can help me with this. So the part A of the question is, does the public generally know enough about Passive House and the benefits it brings? And if not, what should we do about it? I'll start with Gwen, then we'll move this way.
I think it's getting more knowledge, basically, from the projects that are being marketed. There's signs out on the streets saying this is a Passive House project, and I think that makes a big difference. People are recognizing the term more and more. Can they know it more? Yes, of course.
Yeah, I think to get more Passive House projects done, I think our elected officials can work with staff to try and get and incentivize developers. Right now, if your wall is thicker, they'll allow you the extra space for that wall, so you're not penalized for it. But I think they can go a little further to actually have developers sort of tripping over one another to do Passive House.
Mm-hmm. Good.
I think one of the things that when people hear Passive House, they think energy efficiency, they think thick walls, lots of insulation. What I think a lot of people don't understand is that climate resiliency part of Passive House and the human comfort part. And we are heading into, sometime in the next 10 years, we're going to switch from a cooling-dominated climate, from a heating-dominated climate to a cooling-dominated climate. We're going to provide more energy to cool our places than heat them. There's a lot of buildings in Vancouver that aren't going to be very livable, right, in that situation, because they're not built for that kind of a climate, and they're going to need to be retrofitted, right? And I think that I think it would really help in terms of helping people to understand that aspect of it, because I think human comfort in a hotter climate is going to be the thing that really is the difference between really enjoying your home and wishing you were somewhere else or hanging out in a Starbucks where there's air conditioning.
And that includes conditioned air. When it comes to smoke events that are happening every year, having clean air in your unit, less reliance on operable windows, more mechanical ventilation systems.
HEPA
that
filters on your HVACs.
filter things.
All of that.
You know, I think I would definitely want to see greater public awareness, whether it's capital P Passive House or small p Passive House. Again, those principles of keeping it simple to start and getting the bones done properly that recognize the site and the sun and the climate is really important. But what I would love to see the public get to is a place where, you know, you look at Passive House and yeah, it costs a little bit more, but you know, so does a wine cellar, so does, you know, marble countertops. And, you know, I think that as people, we get more and more of these built and people get to experience, you know, visiting friends that live in one or whatnot, you know, they'll come to go, wow, it's so quiet here. Or, you know, it's comfortable even in the summertime. And so I think as people come to understand that there's a lived amenity value that you can wow your friends with in the environment we're in, I think that's going to be the important part, where people can start to connect the value it brings to them personally with that concept of keeping it simple and doing the architecture right to start with.
Right, good. And Brian, I just want to pick up on what you were talking about when we're really virtually everywhere in Canada moving from a situation where we worry about people freezing in winter to people overheating in the summertime. That shift has happened, and this is you know, this city was at the epicenter of that not too long ago.
Well, then to add on that, you know, like what I appreciate about the Passive House standard and net zero as well is that you can't really play too many games with that. You do it and the numbers say what it is, and then you keep working, and then there's usually a tie-in at the end to see if you actually meet those goals, right? So there's no games to be played. And if people look at some of the studies,
no greenwashing.
Yeah,
right?
Well, if you look at some of the research that we've done, and then we did a lot for BC Hydro and for the government, where we looked at energy use over the last 30 years, right? And we found that buildings were using more and more energy per square foot as we got closer to, you know, the late 2000s, and then we were looking at how far off the actual energy use was from the predicted LEED Gold standard energy use, and sometimes they're twice as much, right? And so you can play games with a lot of standards but the consequence of playing games when it's your comfort due to overheating is a little more severe than just spend a little more money to heat you up, to heat your cold suite, right? So I think that there's more consequence to missing the boat now. And what I appreciate about the newer standards are that you can't play games with them.
Right. Very good. Yeah. Very good. So I don't know, Sean, if this is the point of the conversation when I say you should cover your ears, but Rick touched a little bit on it. I'm just interested in the three of you and your perspective of what I will just say any municipality or any provincial government, because you work more than just here in Vancouver, but what government could be doing to promote or to support the development of more of these passive house type buildings, whether they're beautiful 60-story buildings or MURBs or single family residences. Is there one or two things that you could share with us here, especially with me, because I spend my days talking to government folks and always looking for things to talk to them about. So what's really important?
I mean, you can force people to do it, but that has an impact to market as well, right? The market can only do certain things, so you have to incentivize in some way. You have to balance. You have to do a balanced approach. Bring up higher standards, but also allow it to actually work in the market.
Right. And to clarify, though, when we talk about incentivizing, we're not talking about opening up the public purse and giving money, right?
But it involves
some trade-offs.
I think it's related to what was mentioned earlier. It's about creating community that isn't just for sustainability as a goal, but also about creating affordability for housing as well. And that involves getting enough density to accommodate the cost of the construction, as well as the addition of affordable housing or various different markets of housing in a project.
Good. Brian, I'll skip to you, then I'll go back to Rick.
Okay, we'll let Rick drop the mic.
No, I said my piece.
You know, from my perspective as a practitioner, I've been working in this city for 30 years now, and I really didn't see a lot of change, even though people knew they wanted to change and they were paying homage to the words. I didn't see any real change till we had the step code. And once the step code sort of came in and had some base TEDI targets, I think that is where we really started to see people change, pay attention, and really start to focus on those critical numbers like TEDI and TUI, right? So I think codifying these kind of things is really sets a level playing field for everybody. How you get there's a bunch of different paths, and some are really kind of laid out and formal like yours, but it doesn't really matter how you get there. If everybody gets to sort of a TEDI of 15, we can go net zero, we can go passive house, we can, you know,
just get it done.
Get it done.
Just
Yeah,
get
yeah.
it done.
You can do a lot from there, right?
I do want to acknowledge though, for like, you know, for folks who are, you know, obviously everyone knows the energy step code. It was modeled off of the Passive House standard. You know,
That's
like
right.
we looked at what's the big problem, what's
That's
the
right.
standard, how does it work, how does it, and what
What's
are
the
the
best we
actual
can
outcomes.
get sort of in the industry too?
Yeah.
Like what's achievable? You don't want to
Exactly.
set codes that's not achievable.
Part of that whole
Yeah.
idea of step code is it's stepping
Yeah.
and going up, and part of that was to get enough time for the industry to catch up, right?
Right,
And
yeah.
it's having these kind of bleeding edge, or whatever you want to call it, on the edge projects that are kind of pushing the industry along. And if we can start getting the systems designed and figured out, then we can get to that next step.
Personally, I love these projects because when people say it can't be done, you know, I pop this up on the
Yeah.
screen and say it can be, and many other projects around the world. So it can be done. The second thing that I like to do when I'm talking to government folks is say, just adopt the Passive House metrics. You don't have to use the name, right? Because when you use the name, then you're into marketing. You know, there are other standards out there and they get their knickers in a knot. So we just adopt the metrics. Everyone will know it's Passive House, but we don't have to play those games. Just do it. And more we're finding that with other municipalities across Canada who look at what Vancouver is doing and they say, well, if Vancouver can do it, we can do it too. And if nothing more, Vancouver has led the way that way. Rick, what are your thoughts on this
I
area?
mentioned already about the incentivizing, but I think there's, you know, council, at least in Vancouver, has declared a climate emergency, and I think there's two things that can be done there. I think the council can remind staff. People need reminders all the time, and I think that staff needs to be empowered to make decisions when there's choices to be made that they can say, hey, listen, this is a climate emergency, and we would have liked to have done that, but this is in conflict with it, and I'm thumping the table to say this is the route we have to go. Because the speed at which certainly our project moved, Audrey's around somewhere, right there. Audrey and I have been working on the project now for 8 years, and you know, it's got 15 floors of social housing. It's a beautiful looking building, and it's being built to Passive House standards, but it's taken a long time. And I know that the city is working very hard to move things quicker. And all I can say to that end is that if they want a debriefing of what went sideways on our project and how from a developer's perspective what things they could do, I'd be more than happy to sit as part of a group to go through how things can be speeded up. Those are my comments.
Okay, good. I was going to say, I'm not sure we want to share what went sideways right now. You've talked about, we'll talk further down the road. How about that? But Rick, back to you. It's a bit of a facetious question, but because you've touched on it a little bit, maybe it's vacuum windows, I'm not sure. For your next tall building, because I'm going to assume that this isn't the last one you're going to do, for your next tall building, what are one or two things you would do differently from design, or maybe there's more than one or two things, I'm not sure.
That's a good question. Every project is so different that it's hard to say what you would do. Here, Passive House standards, one of the things you do is orientation. You orient your building so that you're getting, in a building like this, you've got views from all sides. There's no way to orient it, and so this building also has a very small lot size. It's the smallest you can have. 130 by 130 is the minimum size you can have to build tall. And so we're going down 11 floors with parking. And so part of which is social housing part, but the majority of it is for the market units. And I just see the future as not having to have so many floors of parking. I think our cars will drop us off at the door, and maybe they can go and park in a much more efficient pattern, so you don't need to go down as deep, or maybe they'll go out and earn some money on the streets. But I see that probably as one of the biggest changes. This project is going to take us 5 years to build, 3 of which are digging the hole and coming back up to grade.
Wow.
So,
yeah, okay, good to know. I had someone ask me if I could ask this group about the impact, if any, of the city's embodied carbon requirements. Did it affect the design, the timelines of the project at all? Maybe
not particularly, but I will say that with the glazing and our discussions with the manufacturers thus far, they're looking into using recycled aluminum for the most part, which is a big decrease in, because there's a whole bunch of different places you can get your aluminum from China, from wherever, and the one that they're looking at right now has a large percentage of recycled content. But it is still a concrete building, so there is still embodied carbon in this building, but where we can pull the dials a little bit, we're looking to that.
We can do that.
Yeah.
Ryan,
I'm going to say, okay, so one of the things that uses a lot of carbon is the glass. One of the things that gets you the best bang for your buck from a Teddy standpoint is triple glazing. You add another layer of glass, you increase the amount of carbon. There's a real push from the carbon people to say, let's get that back to double glass, and we'll put some extra coatings on it. Those extra coatings are, it's push-pull, whether or not they increase the amount of condensation, and they, they're a little less durable, so there's less durability, so maybe they get scratched and you have to replace the glass. So there's a push-pull going on right now with respect to triple glazing, double glazing, and carbon, and it's fighting the Teddy. Mm-hmm. And I think Teddy and durability should trump anything else, because the biggest cost you can have on a building is replacing your IGUs, right? It's right. By far the biggest replacement cost.
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, obviously with this, well, not obviously, but the embodied carbon regs don't take effect until folks applying for a building permit till 2025. So this one kind of skirted it. But a couple of things that have come up. One is, if we could get rid of the parking minimums downtown sooner, and as we move to more car share, more, not having 11 stories that you fill up with concrete would really reduce the footprint significantly on projects. So I think that there's an opportunity coming forward to make changes and advance things that way.
Right, as the world changes.
One of the things we've heard from the development industry, and we're not quite yet. We're not there yet. Like, embodied carbon regs in North America are not mature enough. But what we would like to do is just come up with a life cycle carbon footprint for the building and let the designers make the trade-offs between materials, operations, and they can go, great, I want the triple pane glass, I'll pay the extra embodied carbon because I know it's getting me this. And we're not at a regulatory structure like that. Probably it's going to take us a few more years until we have a lot more regulatory systems in place to make sure those two are equally rigorous.
Very good, and all interesting. So we've reached that part of tonight's show where I've run out of questions. I was supposed to keep these chaps talking till a little bit after 6 o'clock, but I've run out of questions. I would like to get any final thoughts you have, and then I want to see if the audience has some questions that they can toss your way. So, Sean, can I start with you, and we'll just go this way. Any thoughts on this project and Vancouver, and your thoughts for the future?
Well, we've already said why we're excited about Passive House, this project, and dialogues it begins. One of the it seems small, but it's really important. In 2025, all buildings will have to be mechanically cooled. And in this building, what they've done is they've sort of maximized their passive approaches to keep the heat out. And what that really did is allow you to go much more cost effective with your cooling. And we'd really like industry to start paying attention. The way you approach cooling in a building, if you've got to cool a lot of air, it's a whole separate system. Whereas if you can maximize your passive cooling approaches, keep the heat out, then you can use a much simpler, a much more cost-effective approach to doing that mechanical cooling. So that idea of integrating cooling into the ventilation air as opposed to a dedicated system, we really want industry to sort of go, how did they do that? What are the other ways we could take advantage of that approach? Because as we bring in the requirements for cooling, we don't want people doing what we know are way more expensive solutions than they need.
Ultimately, way more expensive. And I'm hoping someone will make a comment about durability of Passive House and perhaps the cost for upkeep for condominium owners or whatever. Certainly operational costs, we know, really impacted if you go Passive House. Brian, any final thoughts before we turn the floor over?
Well, I was here during the leaky condo crisis, and so we build durable buildings for all our buildings because we never want to have another one of those. So from a durability perspective, we always build durable buildings for all the buildings. But in terms of not having to do a midlife deep energy retrofit, that saves a lot of carbon because you're not throwing a bunch of material out and redoing it again. And I think that's the sort of the selling point for the Passive House is that it'll work for the life of the building because you've already done everything you can do passively. And then you can add on what you need to be comfortable. Whereas, it's going to be lots of deep energy retrofits just to live in buildings. So I think that's my closing thought. Oh, wait, one other thing too. Take note that what we're doing here with the big panel approach, I've used it on a couple of projects now. This Passive House large panel approach is the way of the future, I think, in terms of how we're going to build enclosures. It goes up so fast once you start going. We did Brock Commons at the tallest wood frame building in the world. And we were doing 1 floor a day, enclosing it, complete enclosure. So once you can get everything done in a factory and you bring it to site and you put it up in big panels, there's very little construction time needed. You can build these things much quicker.
And people should never underestimate how important that is.
Yeah.
The mayor of Toronto told me once that the number one phone calls to his office was about traffic or road closures for construction in Toronto that are taking 18 months to throw up concrete and steel monsters. Rick, what are your final thoughts before we turn this over to the audience?
I don't have any. I'll wait for the questions.
Okay. Okay, good.
Well, I'll only say that I don't think we're not going to stop the population influx that's happening in this region. There's going to be people coming who want to come to Vancouver and to the region at large, because the climate is changing. As a big piece of that, this has a much milder climate than a lot of places globally. So you're going to have people moving here, and that's going to be a regional thing, not just a Vancouver thing. That's all the way from Langley to Vancouver. It's along the SkyTrain lines. It's along the electrified SkyTrain system. And at each of the SkyTrain stations, there's going to be nodes of growth, and we're going to create this sort of linear, bigger city, regional city, of taller buildings at SkyTrain stations and lower buildings in the remainder, most likely. And those taller buildings, that's the next big wave that's going to be happening of construction, I foresee in the coming years, and we need to be building those with this next level of standards.
Good, good. So Sarah, shall we turn the questions over to the audience? You and Chris, someone must have questions. There's a gentleman right now. We're videotaping this, so if you can wait till we get you to speak into the microphone, that would be great. Then we get your answer or your question clearly.
Oh, okay, this is working?
Yeah, it's working.
One of you gentlemen mentioned that there's significant risk involved in the project, and I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on where particular risks lie. Thank you.
Very good question. I'm not sure who said that. I think I know who, Rick, but
Economic risk.
I won't point at them.
Well, I did mention, we had been looking at vacuum glass and even the electrochromic glass. On this scale, has never been done before. They've been done on smaller projects. Most of your going to say energy, but most of our work is involved in the envelope of the building or the enclosure of the building or facade. And so the walls are quite easy. There's not a lot of risk there. You put in thick walls and you use good quality insulation and good quality details to join together the panels. But where the technology goes into is into the windows and the frames. There's thermal bridging across the frames, and the windows themselves are it used to be that you'd get heated in the winter just as the heat would pass by you and out through the windows, and so that's where our risks are. The vacuum glass we just felt was too big a risk for this project. We'd like to start off with a smaller one, and we've got 4 different manufacturers of this electrochromic glass that worldwide that we're looking at all 4. One happens to be here in Vancouver. It's a homegrown outfit in False Creek called Miro, but the other 3 are quite a bit further ahead. So it probably will be that we end up going to some outside of Canada for the electrochromic glass, but that.
So the risk is that the windows won't perform according to the drawing board?
No, the windows,
problems,
as they tint, you can see the back here, they'll perform great. It's just that you get a call and, hey, my windows aren't working. And so where do it's debugging the system and trying to figure out what's going on, and people are sitting in their suite maybe overheated. So we have to spend an awful lot of time reducing that risk, and we do that by, you have to do a lot of legwork, you have to understand the systems, we have to know how to chase the wires, where are they going to go, the plug-in connections, can we get at them? It's all about reducing that risk when you take on something like this, which is what we're doing.
Part of that's also factory assembly.
Yes, being the people that make these systems that we're going to be buying haven't done this before either, so they're going to be getting in shipments of this, and the electrochromic glass is vulnerable in certain areas, so they have to be able to protect that, and when it gets in and unpacked, how it's handled. So we're all doing this for the first time, and so there's lots of risk, but there's ways of mitigating that risk. That's our job. That's my job and our team's job.
Very good. Another hand. There must be another hand up. There's got to be more questions. I know there's lots of nice food left when we run out of questions. Here's one right here. Thank you. Oh, do you want? Oh, I can't go past the microphone or we'll buzz.
Hi, gentlemen. My name is Tina Mack. Just have a quick questions. Not many of us, I can only speak for myself. I'm not intelligent as all of you. So if I need to explain it to my clients, about passive housing, and the differences between passive housing and normal condo or detached house, how fast can I do this? 60 seconds? So, I just want to have an intelligence, narrative for clients who can understand this a little bit better.
There is a
Thanks.
good YouTube video you can watch, which is 60 Seconds Passive House. It
Yeah,
explains the whole thing.
I think that I've watched that, and sometimes people, they want to know, the differences between passive housing and net zero, and like that kind of stuff. And obviously, the 60 minutes video is in English. So I personally have to translate it into Chinese. So if it is, there are simple things that we can just use daily conversations, not using big words will help. That's all I'm saying.
And that's a really good comment, and it's something that Passive House Canada has to do a better job at, because we struggle with how do we do an elevator pitch.
Yeah.
And how do you describe something that offers so many benefits very succinctly? And Sarah, I hope, is becoming the expert at it because she's working with this group, and I'm going to pick her brains and see what she's saying.
Thank you.
Well,
I like my elevator pitch for Passive House versus true net zero, which is energy net zero, not carbon net zero. True net zero is a passive house with solar panels on the roof.
And if you go to Passive House Plus, it's a passive house with solar panels on the roof. So, all good, all good. Our slogan our slogan at Passive House is build better, feel better. I don't know if that helps.
Maybe, Chris, if I could maybe just say a few things to Tina's question as well then. I mean, I think we've been lucky because with CURV and really being at that sort of, leading edge, we have been able to get out to a lot of people that might not typically know about Passive House. We were looking at our stats, and I think we've had probably close to 10,000 contacts of people who are looking for homes. So I mean, I think these are people who are looking for a beautiful building, in a beautiful city, iconic architecture. Some of them are definitely wanting to live in a safe, healthy, resilient environment, but we're also educating a lot of people as well. And I think when our team, our sales team, when they're talking to people who don't know a lot about Passive House, I think maybe an easy way to sort of, what we've kind of learned is that we really want them to understand, well, one, the Passive House standard is the platinum level standard for energy efficient homes. We tell them it saves up to 90% of heating and cooling energy, and you've got all these bonuses of the comfort, the resilience, the clean air. And I think that those are all things that people, with the wildfires, with the smoke, they can all understand. And then, as you said, as more people get more comfortable with, seeing these buildings built, then they're really going to feel them as well.
Good. And on behalf of Passive House Canada, I need to apologize for a somewhat confusing name. Passive House, H-O-U-S-E. It's a mistranslation from the German H-A-U-S, meaning buildings. And even passive, what does that mean? So clearly it was scientists who came up with this name rather than marketing people who came up with this name. But we're stuck with it, so we'll run with it. Another question. Here, this gentleman at the back.
One of the things I'll just comment once more. Tina, I had a friend that moved downtown. He lived in the suburbs, always wanted to live in downtown Vancouver. His wife died, and he moved into a place just off Robson Street. He lasted a year and had to move out because the garbage trucks and the sirens. Every, at 4 o'clock in the morning, the garbage truck's backing up. So noise, I think the fact that you can live downtown and live in a very peaceful, quiet environment in a passive house is another plus.
And before we get to this gentleman, that raises the point. I was going to just take a survey of the room. Throw your hand up if you've had a chance to visit a passive house building, if you've gone into it. Oh, a good 50, 60% of the building, of people here. That's good to hear. I know we'll be doing, together with Sean St. Amour and his group, will be for Passive House open doors, giving people an opportunity to go into buildings. And for me personally, Rick, it's exactly what you said. Really loud urban environment. I was ushered inside a building and the door closed with a pretty good thud. Reminded me of closing the door of a Mercedes or a German class car, and the quiet took my breath away. For me, it wasn't so much about energy savings. I'm sure that would come later on, but for me, it was the peace and quiet that it brought. So I don't know how you put that into an elevator pitch, but that certainly is important.
Anyway, I just want to wrap it up. So all the buildings in Richmond, because of their, the flight path and all that, they have been, quiet once you close all the windows and things like that. Those are not passive housing, were they? Exactly. So if I just use the word, living in the urban area and then make it very quiet, then people they say, okay, well, all the buildings in Richmond, they have been doing it for a long time. So how do I explain the differences? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And there's all of the other attributes.
Actually, I would like to weigh in on this one.
Go ahead. Sean, jump in.
So again, you'll have to bundle this up. So you've got net zero, you've got the super low carbon, so you've got your global sort of responsibility and taking care of your footprint. We've got the thermal comfort. One of the things in how they approach that low energy though, and really focusing on the envelope and the air tightness, and then using the incoming air to preheat the stale outgoing air. A few years ago, after the last season of big wildfire smoke, Passive House hosted from the HRVs, they did a show and tell of the filters. And it was in September, so we'd had a particularly smoky summer. And they pulled the filters out of the passive houses, and they were caked. I mean, Sean, like they were, like it was an inch thick of what I'll call soot. I mean, that's probably not the scientific term, but that would have been stuff that you were breathing if you had, you know, through the summer of smoke, if you had not built airtight and then had that filtration with your HRV. So I think as we get to more dramatic climate, it's kind of like a healthy, resilient, low carbon, climate responsible home.
Yeah, comfortable. Very good. And the gentleman back here had a question.
Hi there, it's Alex Boston. Your CURV, Rick, at the beginning was very illustrative and powerful. And one of the things it demonstrates is how terrible we are at meeting targets. And so my question is, and the City of Vancouver has done amazing work driving market transformation, buildings like this do. But you alluded to a few things that, you know, there's craftspeople involved in building products like this. It's boutique builders at the bleeding edge that are making it happen. And how do we actually how do we get aggressive about passive? Like, how do we actually bring the entire industry to deliver at net zero? And I don't think it can be done, and there might be a few things that you've alluded to, like Rick, you've mentioned, hey, there's panelization, there's a lot more that we can do on the assembly line. Is that a big part of the solution? Because I don't feel that realistically, you know, we can get, you know, a graduate level, 5,000 level class to all get straight A's and deliver on passive in the current approach. There's going to be a different approach when it comes to scaling and being able to meet our targets.
Yeah, I think the trends you're bang on are more factory building, bigger chunks of construction in the factory being brought and put together on site. The other thing I think is that our municipalities can provide incentives, so every developer would be building Passive House. They've got the keys to be able to do that. It would mean the buildings in our cities might be a little taller and a little wider to give enough area, but it doesn't take much. A couple of extra percentage and developers will trip over themselves to do it. Right now, it's a more expensive way to build, and the more buildings that get built using this Passive House approach, I think will bring down, like everything, it will bring down the costs. But yeah, factory construction, absolutely. I could talk all night about you know, how the future is going to look in terms of construction, and that's it.
I think that Rick's absolutely right. I mean, the way that you want to get better at this is to build more. And so there needs to be encouragement to build more of this. This design team, we've got so much knowledge that we've gained building. We haven't built this yet, designing this. But it's the only way it's going to happen is if we build lots of them.
Yeah.
And that's where most of the energy goes into a passive house in terms of work. It's the design stage. Once it's designed, then you know, there's some testing that gets done as you build to make sure that it's you know, it's performing to the extent that is required in the drawings. But the big hurdle is getting it designed. And we've been,
and I think you know, it's millions and millions of dollars for a manufacturer to tool up to make a panel system like this, and so there needs to be some incentive and some understanding that we're going to build lots more of these, or they're just not going to be interested.
Good question. Good answers. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Thanks, Sarah.
So I'm going to ask a really realistic question. Do you have any have a cost difference between like a normal building compared to passive house building for this one? Do you have a cost difference? Because I'm working on a project at the beginning as a social housing. At the beginning, the city required to have a passive house, and then the BC Housing has to fund the building, and they don't have the extra cost for the passive house. And in the end, it's just going to be a normal building. So, and they don't even want to calculate the difference.
Yeah, that is unfortunate because they will have to come up with the difference very shortly as they retrofit the building because of hotter climate. there are, the first building you do, the first passive house building you do, always costs a lot. There's such a learning curve. So it can be significantly more. But, and not speaking about the curve because it is so iconic and presented a number of challenges. But for most, we'll call them regular buildings, MERBs, that sort of smaller Part 9 building, the studies that we've been tracking, the financial analytics we've been involved with are looking at about a 2 to 8% maximum, green cost. But we have more and more financial analysts telling us that when you do a total cost of building ownership analysis, the total cost of that building over 60 years drops precipitously because you don't have to worry about the increasing price of carbon or the cost of retrofits, of using durable components. So, but it's hard because you've got to pay a little bit more upfront. But the long-term savings are significant. And we hear this with social housing across Canada is the biggest, provides the biggest uptake of Passive House. Toronto Community Housing has adopted the Enerfit standard for its buildings, about 200 buildings they're going to be retrofitting. Hamilton City Housing is doing, they've adopted Passive House. Ottawa, Essex County, it goes on and on and on. So the majority of social housing units currently being built in Canada are being built to the Passive House standard. And the argument is, we could build 1 or 2 more suites if we didn't build to Passive House, but then they wouldn't be Passive House. And the cost savings they see almost immediately more than offset that little bit of additional funding. So we're trying to do more work on the financial side. We've got all of these smart people here who know about the technical, the engineering, the architectural. So we're trying to support the work that our Passive House community is doing by providing that financial analysis about the true cost of building to the Passive House standard.
There's also the cost if we don't do it. And it doesn't really enter onto a pro forma, but with a planet that's got this freight train coming towards us called climate change, it's a matter of how many species are going to go extinct over your lifetime and your children's lifetime. So this project isn't going to save the world, but it's nudging the industry in the right direction. And as I said earlier, it can perhaps be a symbol, that can move the industry in the right
I think one of the challenges, though, because as you look at affordable housing, it is not just construction. It does need to be the operating cost savings. And the challenge you find with government financing is the capital formulas for like how much money you can get from BC Housing is divorced from the operating cost savings. Like those two don't communicate. So you could, it maybe cost you $10,000 more, but it saves you, $5,000 a year. Well, that's easy math. You should spend, but the formulas don't communicate. And so the BC Housing staff will go, over the life cycle, great, it might be a great investment, but we can't get the money. We don't have the money up front. And so you walk away. And it's one of the things our city council did quite a long time ago when we started looking at our own facilities. They said, great, we'll self-finance and we'll pay a little bit more on the capital because we know we've got those operating cost savings and we'll reduce that operating budget. So we've got that flexibility. The provincial government has had trouble doing that, and I think BC Housing struggles with the same sort of challenge of the disconnect between capital and operating.
Very good point. Very good point. Are there any other questions? Oh, yes.
I've got one. Rick, you kind of maybe answer the question, but I'm just wondering if you go back to the design process when you're meeting with the team. When did Passive House get on the table? And I'm sure it fell off the table a few times. So like, when did you guys stick to it and be like, okay, this is now going to be a word we use in the name, in the definition of this project, and just maybe talk about a little bit of the history of like how it came about that you were going to include Passive House in this amazing project.
It never went off the table, it came about was it's a long story, so I won't get into it. But I was asked by the chief planner at the time, what we were doing on the energy efficient Seaside. We were negotiating. We were trying to get back some floors that we seem to have lost. So I said, well, hey, what about we do net zero? And he said, yeah, that'd work. And so I went back to a meeting with Gwen. I don't know if you remember this.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, you know, I think we can get our floors back if we do net. He goes, no, don't do net zero, do passive house. I didn't really know the difference. But it was something that Gwen and Martin convinced me of, that it was a standard the city was much more interested in, and it was a standard that the team could net zero, there's no standard, it becomes very a gray area, and is it this or is it that, and this was very clear cut, and for me, I was sold in a matter of 2 or 3 sentences from both you and,
it really
and
just
Martin.
started from that point.
And we never took it off the table after that.
Sounds like I owe you a thank you.
Oh yeah, hey.
Here I thought it was Rick all along.
No.
There's a question here.
Yes, so this is more of a comment with my experience in being an advocate of the project CURV and having our team worked on it for about, a little bit over 2 years now. What I recognize is that the adoption of the passive house nature and what it represents and what it's going to do, it's much more captivating of a story and a real value to the buyers and the professionals than even we as the sales and marketing agency thought that it would be. As soon as we were able to deliver the message and the education, then the people who are, intelligent, forward-thinking, they are the early adopters who care about the future because they recognize the fact that if we did not do anything to save it and to retain it, then it doesn't matter how much more or less is going to cost if we did not have a future. And I think with the gentlemen on this panel today, we see 4 of them with a lot of gray hair and 1 of them with no hair. So I think they know a little thing or two more than someone like me who has black spiky hair. And I think I've been able to have the privilege to learn a lot from them and being involved in this project. And I think, those who were able to, really appreciate and understand the value and the ideology of what this means of being the first time in real estate development globally where the owners and the residents will be able to contribute positively to our environment and to the human race as long as the building it's standing tall and as long as somebody is living in it every second, every moment. And that's why we commended this rendering behind us, which is the course of the building being built over the next 50 years. It will save approximately 50,000 tons of greenhouse gas emission, which is equivalent to 2.3 million trees, which is equivalent to 4 times the size of our Stanley Park. And this is what it actually represents, which is the size of our entire downtown. And that's my question is, why wouldn't we do more of this?
Very good question. I think we'll leave it there. Well, listen, we'll wrap up now. Thank you, everyone. There's lots of food. There's lots of opportunity for you to chat. I'll turn the floor back to Chris and Sarah. But thank you to the 4 of you for some good conversation.
Thanks.
Just a couple of quick ones. Obviously, thank you. On my notes, it says thank you to the panelists. That was a great conversation. I also wanted to thank Chris Ballard for coming out from Toronto, visiting to moderate.
Aurora.
Also to the Passive House Canada staff for collaborating with the team at the CURV and the product team, and obviously Baker West to organizing this event. I also, it's going to be a double thank you to the Baker West team because they were also able to provide this venue. It's a beautiful venue. And Brivia Group, both Baker View and the Brivia Group team for this space to be able to showcase a symbolic project, but also sort of get into the Passive House space and understand what is potentially possible in this space.
Thanks, Chris. And we wanted to also thank the sponsors again for their generosity. And the sponsors again are Brivia Group, the developer of CURV, Baker West, Small Planet Supply, HVAC Systems and Solutions, and Swegon, as well as RBC.
Finally, quickly, I got two like last minute chicken scratches that got thrown at me. There's a couple of future events through Passive House and sort of the Green Network. So November 4th, there's a bike tour, collaboration with the PH Passive House Open Days. November 16th, a Pulse event with Zebex. It's worth checking that website. The resources links you to an events calendar that's got all sorts of events on it, including the events from Haven, from other organizations. And December 17th is a holiday cheer event that is on the books and coming up. I also want to make a note as a former board member, there is an open call right now for future Passive House board members. I put 6 years in there, and it is a great team. It opens a lot of doors, and I can't say enough. So there is an open call for future nominations. And then finally, I wanted to thank the audience this evening. Without these events, these events would not be possible.